Okay, today is November 12th, 2021, and the Tucson Astrologers Guild is proud to present Erik Roth. Erik has been an inspiration to me as I watched him come into Shamanic Astrology at an event back at my home here back in 2004 or 5. Maybe he'll tell you. I saw him grab a hold of the Shamanic Astrology paradigm and build his practice. And then I was excited to see that he'd published a book explaining his research about Vesta. I ordered one ASAP. It's a fascinating subject. Vesta, it encouraged me to go on and study Ceres more. So I'm really looking forward to tonight's lecture. So visually put your hands together and welcome Erik to our platform.
Thank you, Gail. I'll thank you, Tucson Astrologers Guild and everybody here for attending. I'll go ahead and share my screen if that's all right, Gail.
Good.
All right. See if we can get this. All right. Hope everyone can see this. Okay. Yeah, so thank you for introducing me. I've been practicing shamanic astrology since, started studying in 2004, but have had my own professional practice for about 11 years now, since 2010. And I published the Vesta book, The Sacred Hearth Within, back over a year ago in August of 2020, and that's available online at Amazon. And there's an ebook version as well as a printed version. So we're going to talk about Vesta, and I'm assuming there's going to be time for questions afterwards as well. I'm pretty familiar with how that goes. I've done presentations on Vesta in the past, and so I'm excited about sharing more about this. And this is coming from the perspective of the Shamanic Astrology paradigm. So it's connecting us to those principles, but introducing an entirely new branch. And this research began for me back in 2012 to 2013, when I started noticing on clients' charts, and a couple people in particular back then, where Vesta would be coming in very close to their original natal point of where their natal Vesta is. At the same time, they're in their Saturn return, their first Saturn return. And so that really caught my attention. And so I went and did research initially on solar fire, and then, kind of expanding that into the mythology and the archetypal meaning and all that comes with it came forth, and then eventually was published in the book last year. So I'm going to be sharing a lot about this, and also the relationship. One of the big highlights is the relationship between Vesta and Saturn in astrology, and the pattern that they weave together. So it's really fascinating. That's what really prompted me to learn more about it was because of the noticing of that particular pattern. So let's ask ourselves, what is Vesta? And it's not the largest asteroid in the sky, but it is the one that at certain times in its orbit, particularly around opposition with the sun, that we can actually see it with the naked eye. And it gets to about a 5.1 magnitude. Now, Ceres doesn't quite get that far, although Ceres is now considered a dwarf planet and is larger than Vesta. So Vesta would be technically the most massive asteroid out there. But there are a few other big asteroids that are, all in that size range of where Vesta is for itself. So it was discovered back in 1807, and it was the fourth asteroid discovered. At the time they discovered it, they thought it was a planet back in the early 19th century. And it was located right at 29 degrees Virgo when it was discovered. So pretty, resonant there, that discovery. So it's an asteroid that also has a core, a mantle, and a crust, and it continues to fascinate astronomers and those that are researching, the asteroid belt and beyond. What that this may have been a fragment or part of a core of a planetoid that may have formed at one time early in the early in the solar system. And so, not every. When I was saying it was the one that we can see with the naked eye, it's not every opposition we can see it. Sometimes it's a little farther out, and so the magnitude creeps up to about +6, but sometimes it gets down to that 5 range and can be visible, like it was back in 2014. So let's look at why Vesta was named and the mythology a little bit. I'm not going to pour too much into mythology for time constraints. There's a lot of great research and books out there that I would certainly recommend. I've got a slide at the end that lists a bunch of books that everyone's welcome to go and check out. And I continue to discover and learn more about Vesta year after year with this. So obviously it was the 4th asteroid discovered and named, and it followed a practice of naming worlds from the Roman pantheon. But in this case, they were naming them after the goddesses, whereas most of the other planets, except for Venus, was named after the male gods. Vesta, or Hestia in ancient Greece, was the goddess of the hearth fire. And she stood what was for sacred. And she was also the daughter of Saturn and Ops, or Rhea, the Mother Earth goddess. And her purpose was the care of the sacred fire within the home, the community, and of cities. And it was the job of the temple priestesses back in the ancient Mediterranean times to be the caretakers of that sacred fire. And within the temples, they stood apart. They were the only ones that were round. All other temples, the temples to Vesta and Hestia, are the only ones that were round. Every other temple had either a rectangular or square shape. And so it symbolized Mother Earth. It connected the fire to the earth, and just that sacredness. There was a threshold that people would step in to connect with her, and it was the only one that didn't have a statue of Vesta inside the temple itself. So there wasn't too many images of Vesta or Hestia in ancient times, especially in comparison to all the other gods and goddesses that were the different polytheistic religions that were around at that time. And there is some speculation how it points to her more primal origins and how it can go back even much, much farther, thousands of years prior to the rise of the Greek and Roman pantheon of gods and goddesses. So there's a great mystery that surrounds her, but the sacred flame is something that carried with each of the incarnations of Vesta or Hestia and the ones that were there before. So this fire, this eternal fire, and symbolizing our own fire, our hearth within the home, the centerpiece. And in the ancient stories, Vesta or Hestia never took part in any of the wars that the gods fought. So she was always something that she was separate from that. And she's also the one between her and Janus were the ones that were invoked in every prayer. And she symbolized something really powerful and sacred in people's lives at that time. And so the priestesses that tended the fire, it was their primary responsibility. And the whole term around, or the word around virgin, and what it meant during that time was a woman that was unmarried, not what it means today when, say someone who never had or hasn't had sex. It means something very, very different. It meant the woman that was sovereign unto herself. She was unmarried. She had stepped into her own power in that way. And she served, and certainly in those times, she served the goddess, the great goddess. So that's a little bit about the mythology there. And I would, emphasize the word sacred because when I interpret the charts and interpret Vesta and Shamanic astrology, sacred becomes part of that language, becomes part of that archetypal expression in a person's chart. And we'll explore a few examples of that today. So here is some of the gifts and shadows that can come across with Vesta. The gifts are that it creates opportunities to connect with the middle world or terrestrial initiators of Saturn and Jupiter. There's actually some things around Vesta and Jupiter that come around every so often. Certainly not as powerful as it is with Saturn. It also represents a sacred devotion to a particular archetype and whatever a person was born. Like, for example, I have Aquarius Vesta at 12 degrees, in case anyone's curious about that. This Vesta awakens a natural vibration, or what we can call the rhythm or heartbeat of the sacred qualities within the emerging Vesta archetype. So if you're looking at like sort of like a sort of an analogy of how Vesta can be treated, that is one that I use on occasion with my work. And the shadow of this is more, since Vesta is more of an emerging quality, archetypal quality in a person's chart, depending on where it's located and what it's tied into with the different outer planet aspects. This is archetypally dependent, but it could be an area in life, the shadow, where there can be a disconnection with the life pattern or someone's personal rhythm, that if it's not honored in their own self. And then there can also be an excess to that, an excess devotion given to Vesta, which can lead to, a detachment or sort of less time for the other parts of ourselves, such as Mars or Venus or the Sun or the Ascendant. Okay, so Vesta through the signs, it stays in one sign on average for roughly 2.5 months. And then during the retrograde period, which happened in 2021 and the end of 2020 and the first few months of 2021, Vesta was retrograde and it transitioned. It stayed in one sign for roughly 9 months. And from this most recent incarnation, October through July, it stayed in that sign of Virgo. In this case, I'm going to be talking about that particular expression of Vesta and its relationship with Saturn and Aquarius as well. So, of course, here we have each archetype and sign gives a flavor for specific qualities that we need to keep or intended to keep sacred within ourselves and how we express that in our lives. And I've certainly identified with my own Vesta in my life. And I've got a few examples of people that are in here and showing, I changed the names of a few clients, but then I also have some people that are, well known in the entertainment industry through history in our here 20th and 21st century. So I have some examples around that. So I'm going to skip a little bit ahead and not go over every single archetype. I don't want to make this into an extra long presentation here. And we can go back to that if there are questions, especially in interpreting if someone's asking about their own Vesta, and then we can pour into those definitions a little bit there. So here's a slide that kind of gives you it's just a graphic of where Vesta is located in the solar system. It sits in the asteroid belt with Ceres and Juno and Hygeia and Pallas Athena and the rest of the characters out there. It takes about a little over 3.5 years to orbit the sun, and 2 full Vesta orbits. This is important. 2 full Vesta orbits equal about 1/4 of a Saturn orbit. So 1/4 of a turn around the chart is 2 full orbits, and then 8 of those, almost exactly 29 years, 29 and some change. So that's what really captured my attention when I was doing the initial research about this. I will also share, doing research about this with Demetra George, and her Asteroid Goddesses book was really helpful as well. If you're into the asteroids, she's got quite a lot of them in there. Not all of them, but quite a lot. In fact, I was surprised I didn't see Hygeia in there, but it's something that I'm looking into myself in recent years. So that, again, we go back to that 8 of Vesta equals 1 of Saturn. Okay, so Vesta has a synodic cycle. That's that 29-year, going back to the same place there. So how I've connected with Vesta, because it can become visible at the Sun Vesta opposition point. I from a shamanic astrology background, I look at that as the beginning of the synodic cycle, and of course the end of it for Vesta. Just similar to in shamanic astrology how it's determined for the Mars synodic cycle and the 26-month process that it goes through. For Vesta, this can take anywhere from 16 to 17 and a half months. Again, it doesn't have a perfectly circular orbit, so it's a little bit elliptical in its orbit, and so that and a little eccentric. So sometimes it's really far above the ecliptic, and sometimes it's closer to the ecliptic. It all depends on its on where it is in the sky and what it's doing. And then after 21 synodic cycles, so the 29-year return period, there's 21 synodic cycles, or 21 of those, like 16 to 17 and a half month periods that equal that 29-year period. That's when you get that process taking place there. So this is, again, that book that I wrote, Sacred Hearth Within, I plan on expanding that book in the coming years, and perhaps with some additional material about maybe some other asteroids, and certainly some of the work that Gail Chilson has done with Ceres has also been inspiring, and I even mentioned some of what she's done with Ceres in my book. So it's, kind of connecting and people doing their own research and discovering maybe new insights for themselves. I totally encourage that. The more people that are out there, the richer we can get in some of this work and this material. So return cycles of Vesta, and this is that I mentioned, the synodic cycle of the 16 to 17 and a half months, and then turning into eventually the 29-year cycle. So this connects us to something that I've connected with in especially inspired by Daniel Giamario's interpretation of the Venus and Mars returns, and connecting into a Vesta return for us as human beings. And so we can experience a few in our life, some of the major ones, which are the ones that, revolve around the Saturn returns at 29, 58, and 87. But Vesta returns can also, what I want to call secondary returns or minor returns at ages 11, 18, 40, 47, 51, 69, 80. They're not as close. Some might be a little closer than others. And if a person was born with Vesta retrograde, then a person typically won't have as close of a Vesta return as the other ones. That would be also the same for people that were born with, say, a Mars or a Venus retrograde. So a Vesta return comes when Vesta comes back to its original position in the same sign, close to the same degree on a person's solar return or birthday. And so I'm going to share an example of my own chart and show you what that looks like here in the sort of the tables that I have when we get to that slide in a little while. All right, so return cycles between the ages of 29 and 30 58 and 59 and 87, 88, that's when those Saturn returns take place. So Vesta returns can be prior to this or during. Usually there's a lot of overlap in the first two Saturn returns, and then typically prior to the third Saturn return. It starts to get off center by the time you get to the third one of the big three. And then at 11 and 18, typically just prior to the first Jupiter and nodal returns. And then at age 40, Vesta ties in with the Venus return. So these are examples of how you can connect Vesta with some of these other cycles. And if you've studied shamanic astrology or know of it, I've heard talks about it, you know, that's something that's well worth getting into when learning about, say, these other kinds of return cycles for a person, such as Venus and the nodal returns. I've also discovered that there is, it's not as what I call heavily weighted, but it definitely has an impact. Like Mars, Venus, and Mercury with each synodic cycle in shamanic astrology, there's something called a overtone to the cycle. And, you know, it's not, I'm not saying that everyone has to use this. This is just something that a person could use to further understand their own archetypal expression with Vesta. So the overtone provides an additional understanding to the expression of one's natal Vesta position. But the archetype or the house, actually both of those, the archetype and the house, provide more of a leading edge to the greater Vesta inquiry. So whatever those are is really the main thing, but the overtone itself, meaning that where you were born in the 16 to 17 and a half month period of that particular Vesta cycle, which begins at the Vesta Sun opposition, then that also adds to that unique Vesta expression in your chart. Okay, so here's some examples from my own life. During my nodal return and Vesta return, I had my 18 and 19. I had my very first connection with the stars. It was the first time. I grew up, born and raised in Los Angeles. So it was the first time I got to see the entire star field, or at least a good portion of it, and the Milky Way. So my friends and I, one evening during the summer, we drove up into the mountains, and pretty far from the city. You could still see the city lights from a distance, but from where we were, we could see, at least at that time, I thought I was seeing all of the stars, and maybe certainly now that I've been to the deserts and other places, it wasn't even, I would say, close to that, but it gave me a great hit, and I felt a powerful draw to the stars at that time. And between the nodal return and the Vesta return, it helped prompt me to discover my love of the stars. And at the time, I didn't know that where it would take me necessarily, but little did I know, become an astrologer. So again, my natal Vesta is in Aquarius, and it's conjunct my natal North node, both in Aquarius, in the same sign. So, and then at 29, this is another one. When I was looking back at my first Saturn return, I definitely had a really powerful spiritual awakening during that time. This was in 2000 to 2001, and really poured my energy into what defines the cosmos, links to my quest and my future work, as well as my understanding who I am. What's my role? What is this thing called life? Who are we, and why are we here? And that prompted a multi-year journey for me, and eventually led me to learning about shamanism, and then eventually shamanic astrology. So clients, this is one, I've got two client examples here, and I'm not using their real names, of course, but it was a woman that I did a reading for, and I got to do some Q&A with her about some of her prior cycles. And she began at 18, during her nodal return, to understand and get in touch with her sacred interests. she had a Vesta, and I don't know why. I must be when I was recalibrating this presentation from another presentation. She's got um, uh, the Vesta in, I believe it's Leo. And so she was able to bring forth her Vesta sacred interests here, doing creative work, singing, stage play, and eventually she had her own awakening around her Saturn return and her major Vesta return and being able to teach at the Waldorf School. And then it really helped her. And this is that whole deeper connection with Vesta and Saturn coming forth into the world and really helping her achieve what she wanted to achieve at that time. And then I had another one, another client with Vesta and Gemini in her 6th house. And this was definitely a powerful activation for her during her first Saturn return. And the Vesta return started prior to her Saturn return. And when this came around, and I was actually working with her at the time of her Saturn return and Vesta return. So I got to see firsthand of what she was doing, but it allowed her a greater freedom of expression, an immersion into the knowledge and movement toward embracing her gifts and talents in service to spirit. So it was this Gemini creative space, but it was done from a, the 6th house perspective. Certainly work was involved in there, but the sacred even more so. I tend to equate the 6th house with the particular sign of Virgo. So it really shows up in a big way in her chart. And so she was actually, during that time, she started creating objects and jewelry and developing a website and outreach to connect with customers. And so it kind of seeded with her combination with her Saturn return, seeded the next 29 years span of time for her to embrace her part of her life purpose there. Okay, so the first Saturn return, or not Saturn return, but the first Vesta return always connects in sync with the Saturn return, and typically during the second part of the Saturn return. But again, it can happen sometimes depending on the retrograde loop of Saturn and the placement. So it can happen sometimes before or after. But Vesta's role during the Saturn returns provides a deeper understanding and order and sacredness to their life's path. And Vesta returns can frequently also happen, the minor ones, during Saturn square Saturn cycles and Saturn opposite Saturn cycles as well. So I'm going to give you some examples of what those look like from my own chart here. So, okay, this is just a slide that's kind of a little bit redundant in this, but I look at this as this greater depth of connection to spirit and to devotion to emerging areas of interest and skills and talents, things that archetypal qualities that are coming through, and both Saturn and Vesta help us in their own mode of operating, help us unearth that and enhance that, or help us work hard for it to bring it into life, into form, into the third dimension. So here's some examples of so there's my birth information, the date of my first, when I was born, and then the dates of when Saturn was square or Saturn was opposition and Saturn was returning. And here's the original Vesta position and the original Saturn position. And then if you go down the line, you could see the Vesta position, like at the first Saturn square, not quite there. It's still more than almost a degree off. This one's, that opposition didn't quite get there. This one's a little bit closer to Aquarius, but of course this Saturn return, that's why these are minor. But this Saturn return definitely came within 2.5 degrees of its original position there when I hit my solar return on my 29th birthday. And so there's my birth information for those that are curious about that. 9:45 a.m. in Los Angeles, November 25th, which is, of course, coming up here in just less than 2 weeks. Okay, so this is more calculations of my future Saturn returns and how many months the Saturn and Vesta returns overlap. And we could see that for me, I had about a 9 to 10 month period. So nearly the whole, the Vesta return is much longer, but because of the nature of it. But the Saturn return, usually we'll look at that as a 9 to 10 month process. And through this is interpreting through the lens of shamanic astrology. And then at 58 to 59, it's only going to be overlapping for about 5 to 6 months. And then even smaller, a shorter range of time, 3 to 4 months, and at 87 to 88. And so for those who are out there that are looking at their own Saturn returns, either prior or future Saturn returns, this is something to look at. And Gail, I think I want to offer this to people that are attending this, to have a table that has all the Vesta Sun oppositions through the 20th and a good portion of the 21st century, so that they can find out where their overtone is and kind of calculate when they're going to have a Vesta return for themselves. So that'll be an offering for everyone here, and I can send that to you a bit later, Gail. And I also list those in the book that I wrote too. So feel free to get that. It's relatively inexpensive. This is my chart with the 3 Saturn returns being placed on here in the multi-wheel, and you can see Saturn's position here in this blue shaded area on the right hand side, and how each return it goes a little farther back. And then here's Vesta's position here, and then there's the Sun, the solar return here. So you can see Vesta gets a little farther back than later in time. Is there a question? Oh, okay. Okay, so before I get into that, so I just want to pause for a moment here. I'm going to show you some examples of Vesta in some people's, famous people's charts, just to further elucidate what Vesta brings. And these ones have a combination. That means that they're combining with another point in their chart. And I list more examples in my book, but these are ones that I want to give at least some examples in this presentation, just for the purposes of this.
Erik, I'm sorry for interrupting, but in that slide, why? I mean, your Saturn return is going back to the same place as your Saturn return. So why is it that there's a recession, if you will? I mean, shouldn't it always be at 20? Where I'm not sure what your natal chart is. Is it 3 degrees Gemini? Is that what your natal?
Yes.
Okay, so why is not the Saturn return every single time? What are you depicting here? I'm not exactly sure, because shouldn't always the Saturn return be at 3 degrees?
Yeah, eventually, yes. But this is focusing in on the Vesta return here and showing this position of Saturn, and the and why that there is less overlap in the later Saturn returns.
Oh, I see.
With the Vesta return.
Okay. And so your Vesta, you said, is at
7 degrees Aquarius here.
Okay.
And actually, it's almost 8 degrees, but it doesn't show the minutes on this graphic here. And then you can see, but it precesses. So every Vesta return, it precesses a few degrees each time, every 29 years. So it gets a little farther away, gets a little farther away, gets a little farther away. And so that's basically what I'm showing. And I've got another set of tables that explain this a little bit more. But I wanted to give people kind of a sort of a preview of what this looks like. And so when they're looking this up, and of course, Saturn, because of the retrograde loop of Saturn, it doesn't always come back, it's a 29.5-year orbit. So it doesn't really come back exactly on your birthday, synodically speaking. So it can be off by, a few degrees later on, and so forth down the road. I hope that makes sense, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Or Greg, sorry, Greg. I didn't.
That's fine.
I have the
That's
yeah.
all right. I just don't understand, why does it precess? Why would then you consider the return it being a return if it precesses? Wouldn't the degree, the natal degree, be what indicates, oh, that's the return, because synodically, or you trying to find the angle with the sun? Yeah, okay, I got you. Okay, so
Right.
it's the sun. I got you. Okay, all right.
Exactly. And
okay.
so it precesses in because of the orbital dynamics of between the Earth, Vesta,
Oh, I
around
got
the
it.
sun.
Oh, right. Okay.
And
I was
so,
focusing
yeah.
on the blue, but I see you're right. Your sun is exactly 2 degrees.
Yep.
I got you. Okay. Thanks
Yep.
for clearing that up. Thank
You're
you.
welcome, Greg. Not a problem. Okay, so here's an example here, Venus and Vesta. And this is John Coltrane, musician, and his Vesta was conjunct his natal Venus, and he's got another asteroid Hygeia here, and his descendant is there. So there was an example that I was using in relationship to his relationship to the feminine and what Venus represented in his really his love of music, and especially the rhythm and the pattern, the reverence he had for his music and for music in general. The complexity that is really strongly associated with Virgo itself as an archetype. Vesta, I would say, enhanced his his initial and his later love, continuing love, and his deeper love for the music itself and his reverence for it. And so Vesta was something I think that really played a powerful role in helping him become, in his work and his music. Obviously, the other parts of his chart showed up there, and I don't necessarily need to do a full interpretation of his chart here. I'm just going into this from a position of looking at his Vesta archetype here. So, the complex patterns of music and its sacredness and his relationship with jazz were a really powerful way for his inner feminine to express itself. And so, Virgo is an archetype that concern a person's dedication, depending on where it is in the archetype, in the relationship with the other planets, it can turn that into something spiritual. And certainly Coltrane released many songs later in life that contained a sense of the spiritual. And he was born with the Pisces ascendant. So there is certainly a strong polarity of being in service for him in this lifetime that showed up really powerfully in that archetypal polarity there. And I, in my study of him, it really, I saw that really began to show itself in his 30s, and certainly showing up in his musical creations and spiritual pursuits. But again, this is just an example of Vesta showing up in a well-known person's life. This musician, John Coltrane, and he actually, for some, he was more than just a musician. He was it was almost like they revered him and his music, and sort of love his music to such a degree. It was like they would dedicate, as part of their spiritual language to John Coltrane. And I know a few people who when they speak of him with a certain deeper reverence, and so that certainly can come across in that way.
Excuse me, Erik.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a friend who used to go to his daughter's house. She used to have metaphysical, spiritual classes at her house and meetings in San Fernando Valley. So,
oh wow,
I think she carried forth his work after his death. Yes,
beautiful.
Well known as a musician too. Yes.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Wow, it's pretty amazing. And this is just another reason why I just love astrology so much, is when you can look at well-known people and to see their who they are and how they express themselves. And Vesta is just one component of all of that. It's part of the reason why I just I'm still in awe over this language in general, and I want to, if I could spend many lifetimes learning astrology, I will definitely do that. But yeah, thank you, Tom. Here's one, Leonardo DiCaprio, someone who's still around here. He has the North Node and Vesta conjunction, and this is in the sign of Sagittarius with Neptune as well. Now, what I found in his, not just his necessarily his acting work, but in his causes, he definitely takes on causes and bringing them forth. And I think with that connection in Sagittarius in the third house and the communication, he certainly certainly speaks out about this, and he's made many contributions to charities, and has done documentaries as an activist and an actor about climate change and animal welfare. So it really shows up, and I would say, obviously, we know that his Libra and Scorpio show up in a big way in his Jupiter and Pisces, but I find that this kind of gives him a certain like questing type of energy that wouldn't necessarily show up in these other signs here, and for meaning and truth, and just to be out there and discovering and be well traveled in that sense. So that can really be broadcast out there, that I found to be a contributing factor in his questing for life and truths and meaning and philosophy. All of that shows up in his work, and obviously he's generally been a really well-known actor throughout his years, and I've liked some of his films, but I was curious about that, and I wanted to showcase this. And then the third example, Whitney Houston. This one was more of a looking at Vesta and Mars. Now, it's interesting, Ceres is also there, a little bit of a loose conjunction there, not quite 10 degrees, but I'm sure that's certainly with her Mars, that's certainly a factor. But in Vesta's case with Libra, and the fact that it's here in the 8th house, I think played a really powerful role in her relationship, certainly with Bobby Brown, another musician from the 90s, and her own battles with addiction, and the want to say the on and off again relationship that she had with Bobby Brown, and she was trying to, I think, come into her own sovereignty. She was somebody that was a star, and had a certain connection originally with her Aries moon that was, really strong-willed, and somebody came across this, I would say, alpha and rough and willful, and it would, might even rub the people the wrong way. But her Libra, her desire for actual relationship and wanting to bring that in, there was this, a really challenging polarity that she had, especially if she mixed in with the wrong people. And that being triggered in her own life, Vesta essentially brought forth the intent to make relationship and conscious equal partnership sacred for her. Well, at the time, I think here is where I got a little quote in here. So in addition to that, she had Juno and Ceres in the same sign of Libra, and the most important contribution was from Jupiter here in opposition, and how she defined relationship and how important and sacred it was to her. And these qualities, they showed up very, very strongly in the music, and she kept longing for the ideal relationship. And Aries can also promote a sense of loyalty and like a devotion to a cause and a purpose. And so that battle that she had in that fractured relationship certainly showed itself up in the journey that she had with it. So the intent of all this was for her to explore the great depths and transformation of relationship at its deepest level. This is where the 8th house comes in, the house of death and rebirth. And she certainly did experience that. And eventually she battled drug use. And there was an interview that I saw many years ago with Diane Sawyer, and where she was discussing her the relationship that she had with Bobby Brown and the drug addictions that she experienced. So she really opened up to that, and I found that to be really powerfully represented in this in this polarity. It wasn't the only thing. Obviously, there were other factors here. This Chiron ascendant conjunction is an example, and then the Pluto Mercury, I certainly played a role there. But as far as this, for the purposes of this presentation, looking more about the relationship factor and her relationship to the masculine in particular. Okay, so now I'm going to show everyone. This is a kind of part of the question that Greg was bringing that up, and this around the 29-year and Vesta returns, and this is an example of Vesta Sun oppositions where it shows Saturn's position 29 years later. So this is taking a particular date. I chose one not too long ago, but then advancing time 29 years later, we can see that there's about a 4-day difference in the synodic cycle. So from February 17th, 2010 to the bottom of this slide, February 13th, 2039. And so this is where the sun position is here. Vesta here, only 4-degree difference here. Almost 4.5, but about 4 degrees, closer to 4 degrees there. And then Saturn, of course, it's different because Saturn, has a little bit longer orbit, but it definitely overlaps with the position there. So you can see it's only about 5 degrees, 5.5 degrees away from its original position 29 years prior. And one could take whatever position, I'm using this Vesta Sun oppositions, but in most cases, especially when Vesta's not retrograde, you can take any of those 29-year periods of time, and you can find a lot of correspondence there. It's fun to explore all of that. And again, this is a slide is kind of capturing part of the handout that I'm going to be giving to people. Now there's a larger Vesta cycle. There's this larger precessing of Vesta. As I mentioned before, here, look at, Vesta started out here in Leo in 2010. And then 29 years later, it precessed about 4 degrees from where it was 29 years prior. So if we extrapolate that, on average, about 201 years to precess from one sign to the next. So in order for it to precess all the way back to Cancer from that Leo position, where it was here in 2010. So another century and a half or more there for it to go into the next sign, or the next sign that's before it. So this is what we have, and this is this is average of 201 years, but it can be a minimum of 145 years or a maximum of 261 years. And so this is, again, a larger scope of the Vesta synodic cycle. So the 29-year Vesta cycle shifts by about 3 to 6 degrees on average, and into the next, what I call the overtone sign, or in this, the case, like, for example, it was only about 4.5 degrees from that 29-year period example that I shared earlier. So this is just that's kind of an average amount there. Less degrees generate longer precess cycles. So if it only precesses, say, 3 degrees, then it's going to take longer to precess into the sign before it. But if it precesses more, it'll move quicker into the sign before it. And then Saturn's position typically falls within 5 to 6 degrees every 29 years of Vesta's 21 synodic cycle calibration, meaning that slide I was sharing before, Vesta Returns, or Vesta synodic cycles, 29 and a half. What do I have here? No, where is that? Okay, here. 16 to 17 and a half months. That's the length of a synodic cycle from opposition to opposition. Or if a person decided in their own practice that they felt they want to use the Vesta Sun conjunctions as the start of the synodic cycles, then it would still be roughly about the same amount of time that would transpire between those two points. Okay, so here is 29-year spans between Sun Vesta oppositions with the Saturn position shown. So you can see the number of years and days. So it doesn't ever quite get to perfectly 29 years, but it gets to within, within a week anyway of that period. You can see the Sun not, kind of precessing a bit, just like with Vesta, trying to get back to the same position there. And so this is giving you a little bit of a larger picture. And again, I do have this shared, some of the stuff shared in the book that I wrote. So these are some examples of when, one example of when Vesta was visible or just barely visible in 2018, when there was a acronychal rise or a Sun Vesta opposition. That was at 5.3 magnitude. And then in 2019, Vesta was at 6.5. This is, again, these are Vesta Sun oppositions. So the Sun being on rising in the east and Vesta setting, or vice versa, where acronychal rise is Vesta rising and the Sun setting. You could do it either way. But when it gets within about a 5 to 5.5 degrees magnitude, 5 to 5.5 magnitude, that's when it can be visible. Uranus can actually get at times roughly about 5.6 to 5.8 at opposition. So not in each case, not in each opposition with Uranus, but it can at times do that. And there's some speculation that the ancients may have seen Uranus, maybe not knowing what it was. And I could say the same maybe with Vesta too. They may have seen Vesta, but it moves relatively slowly, especially in comparison to, say, Venus or Mars or Mercury. They may not have known that that was like a wandering star. And the same thing with Uranus. But again, this is speculative because we don't have any hard information about that. But knowing the ancient peoples, they were sky watchers throughout the globe, and they probably spotted it, most like. Okay, so I'm going to dive in the last part of my presentation to this recent, the most recent Vesta Sun opposition. And this was in the sign of Virgo.
But there were a couple of questions.
Yes.
There were a couple of questions in the chat pertaining to the last bit.
Okay.
Did you want to take?
I could. I wasn't sure the format to whether to take them after the presentation or not.
It's up to you. I just it's up to you. If there have been a couple of questions coming in.
Okay.
It's up to you. Wait till the end if you want to.
Okay, looks like I know that. Okay, yeah, Tom and Greg, they did share some questions with me verbally, and okay, so Greg has so the Vesta return, then the entire length of the 16 to 17 month cycle that encapsulates the return to the natal solar Vesta angle. So yeah, I mean that would be a Sun Vesta opposition to Sun Vesta opposition. So that would be the aspect there that would come back to that place. So capturing from that 16 to 17 month period. So in this case, with the slides I'm going to share, the last Vesta Sun opposition that took place was March 4th, 2021. And the very next one is going to take place next year on August 22nd, 2021. And so that's the same, the Vesta Sun opposition. That's the same aspect there. And then, so Janet had a question, what about that square with the nodes in Grand Cross? So Janet, was there a particular chart you were talking about around that?
Yes, I was looking at.
She was talking.
Oh, Okay, Whitney Houston. Okay, let me bring that up again. So yeah, the nodes. So the nodes, played a role in her past and future, and how, I mean, really significant. I would say a lot of significant weight towards what the sort of that expression of what Vesta and Mars come in and share about, especially Vesta and conscious equal partnership. So yeah, the nodes would definitely be playing an additional layer, additional role in the emphasizing of that. But of course, the nodes have their own unique expression, being future and past, and the sign in the house showing up strongly there too. So there's a sort of, in the North Node in Cancer, a sort of creative nurturing that's taking place for her future that she may have embodied. But I, looking at this eighth house, it really has a lot of, I say challenge or difficulty that for her to embark upon. But ultimately, may, if she had, if her destiny was to live beyond 2012, she may have found some level of peace and harmony there down the road with that. So, but again, it's definitely not an easy aspect there. So thank you, Janet. And okay, so Greg, you have one that's about Vesta Returns occurring at 51, and in between the overlapping with the Chiron return, the 7 square. Have I explored the relationship between Chiron and Vesta? Not very much, but when it does come in, and especially at the 51 age, if your Chiron return is overlapping with this minor Vesta return, then yes, Vesta becomes a really prominent figure in the nature of the healing that you're doing. So the Chiron sign and house, of course, plays a role in that, the sign being more of the subgenerational energy, and the house position and any other aspects, hard aspects, would also promote and give you clues as to what the nature of the wound is, or the healing that must be embarked upon. So that's something that is absolutely relevant, and one worth exploring. But again, there's so much to explore with all of these, to bring it all in. It's I haven't, like, I've in the book, there are little sections about Vesta and its relationship to all the various planets and points. And it doesn't have might say, that regular of a rhythm as like fine-tuned to say with Saturn, as it does say, with it has a rhythm with some of the other asteroids as well. But Chiron's a little more erratic in that way. But when you get that 51-year marker, that's definitely a one worth exploring there. And I think, okay, I know that, okay, there's some other conversations. So yeah, I'm about to turn 50 myself here. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's go back to what I was talking about here, and then we'll also have some additional questions available. All right, got that. Okay, this is really this last bit that I wanted to share about is this recent Vesta incarnation. So Vesta spent roughly 9 months in the sign of Virgo. And I have found, this is additional research that I want to add to the book, is that and I was doing readings in part based on this for people that had, for those of you out there that had some, maybe some personal points or planets in the sign of Virgo, in the end of 2020 and the beginning of, and the first 6.5 months of 2021, Vesta spent all that time in Virgo. And so it was tracing back and forth over most of the sign. And so I was looking at people's charts and going, okay, Vesta really becomes a longer activator. It isn't just like spending a couple of weeks over a personal point and then it's gone, but it's actually spending many months over that sign. It's actually introducing that. That can happen with Mars as well, and to a lesser degree with Venus and Mercury. So a person that has that. And then even like any ones that are maybe opposite or square, you could also include that, say with Sagittarius, Pisces, and Gemini as well. So that could be another expression of Vesta during its time where it's retrograde and goes into opposition with the sun as sort of a cycle to count and to activate whatever gifts, be it from the moon or the ascendant or other parts of one's chart there. And it was so the sign of Virgo, a seasonal sign, of course, was primarily in the constellation of the Lion, and was the exact opposition point happened near the star Cherton, so in the body of the Lion there. So it definitely the constellation itself also brought forth some of the gifts, and I want to share to a large extent. Anytime I explore the Lion, as well as the combination of Leo and Virgo, I always go back to what Dane Rajar in his book, The Pulse of Life and the Astrological Signs writes about the mysteries of the Sphinx and how those two signs and that constellation really combines. It adds this level of complexity and mystery and sacredness to that is infinite. So it can become you might say, a personal archetypal force for, if you were born and had some personal points in Virgo and or even near the star Regulus at 0 degrees Virgo, the Sphinx itself can become something of a personal archetypal image that you can work with, spiritually and magically. Okay, so let's go to here. So this is something I've noticed. I did some research. The last times that Saturn was in Aquarius and Vesta had spent several months in the sign of Virgo during that Vesta Sun opposition time, there was this great amount of environmental awareness, climate awareness. And in 1963, there was the beginnings of this awareness from with mainstream scientists that, hey, are we changing? Are we affecting the planet? This, relationship with pollution, and what are we doing here? And so that was that sort of that beginning, and it seeded that movement that eventually brought forth the EPA. And it also helped, along with a particular book that was published by Rachel Carson called Silent Spring, about the damages of the chemical pesticide DDT. And so this is the Vesta and Saturn Aquarius combination really brought forth quite a lot in the 1960s. But then also in 1992, the original framework of the Kyoto Protocol in 1997 was seeded in 1992 with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that was the original seed point there. And then again in this year, and this has been all over the news as well in various outlets about what's going on in Glasgow. So whatever pledges are being made, whether it's enough or not, whether the world's going to change or not, knowing this relationship between Saturn Aquarius and Vesta and Virgo gives me some sense of hope that there is something being done on a larger scale, that there is to some degree a genuine desire by at least a good portion of the world population to try to do something. Now, whether the leaders themselves and the industries themselves actually make all the perfect alignments and investments that they need to in order to make the changes, I think that the population at large is making changes, and it's the awareness itself that is the key factor that will push industry, that will push governments, that will push society to get to a place where we actually may be able to mitigate it or lessen the damage of climate change So again, there's a major agreement. There's been some minor agreements that have been made at the COP26 in Glasgow, but they're looking for a much larger agreement that may or may not occur. But I look at it as more of this greater awareness to even that we're having this conversation, that we're having this big discussion, that that's the important thing right now. And so this whole connection is worth watching, and that there is something very real being transpiring right now in Glasgow and particularly around the world. Okay, so just some additional information about these other big asteroids and the dwarf planet, and their orbital periods and their synodic cycles. Like, for example, Juno has there's returns that Juno has at ages 9, 13, 22, 26, 35, and 48, which is nearly exact. And then also at 96, which is nearly exact. And I know that Gail, you and I, you've done this, and I also looked at this as well, the Ceres returns. These are, I mean, just smack dab exact every 23 years. Ceres comes back to its original position. And that's that's a really powerful thing that we should definitely be aware of in our own lives, and for those astrologers out there that are doing readings in your clients' lives, it's worth exploring and seeing into, depending on the sign and the house position and other aspects that are going on with that particular one. Pallas Athena, though, it's her orbital period and returns are very, very close to what Ceres returns are. And so she's kind of on that particular force. I look at her as having more Aquarian-like qualities. But I think in continuing to do research, I think that there's some other qualities. I know Demetra George outlined some other ones, that it isn't that she's only Aquarius. I think that she's got other things in her that contribute to that. It's sort of an archetypal combination. And then for Juno, I look at it as primarily associated, or if you want to say a traditional, sort of a rulership, if you wanted to say that, then it would be Libra. And looking at ages 48 and 96 as the exact or near exact returns. So things that I'm exploring as well, Hygeia is another one that I'm into looking at. And I had a client who's also studying to be an astrologer, and she's looking at another centaur called Chaliko, or it's the wife of Chiron. So that's one of the other things to definitely to explore here. So this is what I got in the time. I wanted to leave some time open. I didn't know how much time to devote to the presentation. So yeah, this would be great to open up to further questions. Although there's, I think now, here we go. Jane has got a natal Uranus, Pluto, Mercury, Sun at 15 to 27 Virgo. So yeah, Jane, you would have definitely been strongly at the effects of that Vesta transit impacting your chart and activating that Sun Mercury relationship with Pluto and Uranus. Wow, that could have been, with Virgo. I mean, Virgo is really strongly associated with order, and there's been research done about the Virgo archetype and associated with Vesta and Hestia, the goddesses Vesta and Hestia, and all the things that went on in the temples, including the more ancient tradition of sometimes travelers going in and then having intimate experience with a priestess as a way of devoting itself, the experience and the energy, to the goddess itself. And so there's like a sacred sexuality that can come from, and Demetra George actually writes about that as well, in the sign of Virgo and also in this asteroid of Vesta. And then Greg, thank you for sharing that. The Juno return at 48 corresponds with the Jupiter return and the Venus return. Yeah, absolutely. that's another powerful resonance there that is worth exploring, and what all that means. And there's a lot of things that happen at 47 to 48. The Jupiter return, we have the Mars return as well in and around that, and then now also a Juno return. So and then here's some resources for people. And again, this is being recorded, so you can look at some of these book titles. This is not the whole list, but these are some of the major factors. Solar Fire has been absolutely great for me to explore the different synodic cycles and being able to calculate that. And of course, all these books about the feminine and goddesses and the mythology, feel free to dive into that. Again, this is not a complete list. And the original inspiration of, as far as like synodic cycles, that originally came from Daniel Diamario and his work in the Shamanic astrology paradigm. And so I've sort of looked at that as a sort of a template to look at what Vesta brings in, or maybe these other asteroids and other planets that we discover and or find some value in when we're looking at the charts. All right, so Gail, what do you think here?
Well, great, Erik. I'm really enjoying this. You have a lot in your book about Vesta and the different signs and her relationships with different planets. Does anybody have a question about their placement of Vesta or something in a sign or a conjunction with a planet? Of course, I should put a plug in for your book, Erik. It's simple and easy to read.
Thank you. Greg did have a question here. His Vesta's at almost 9 degrees Leo, and he says, could I show about the slide about the archetypes of Vesta and Leo? So I was just going to share here. So as Jupiter would be like the quest for, I look at the Vesta natal position as the sacred province or devotion to for whatever archetype. So it would be a devotion or a sacred province of Leo. So Greg, it would be to creative force through radical radiant self-love. And that's how that sacred experience of Leo would come across from a shamanic astrology perspective. Okay, and he says, thank you, you're welcome. All right, so any other questions from anyone? You're welcome to chime in with a verbal question or a video question or a chat question.
Saleeve is asking a question about how would you interpret Vesta in the 8th house, trine Sun. That means.
What's BML? Oh, Black Moon Lilith. Oh, okay. So somebody's saying, okay, yeah. Okay, I have not studied Black Moon Lilith. I have not. I mean, I've read a little bit about it, but I certainly don't feel confident to share more about that. But Vesta in the 8th house, what sign, Saleeve, would Vesta be in? Oh, Vesta in Virgo. Okay. Okay, so Virgo, so you would have definitely had a Vesta returning back to that its natal position there. So trining the sun would be more of like it's in a trine. There's not much of a hard edged flow to it. It's more of definitely an easy flow. So that the sun would, I would say, enhance what Vesta and Virgo would bring in. So the sun would play a role in that Virgo. So obviously your sun would be either in Taurus or in Capricorn. So whatever that sun would be feeling. Okay, so that Capricorn has a lot of resonance with the sign of Virgo, and that they're both very strongly connected to wanting to work and putting on a lot of attention toward work. And in Virgo's case, though, it's more sacred work. So that it just ends up being much more practical. And there's sort of an easier flow, easier relationship with that. Now, if the sun was in Taurus, then that could create a little bit different dynamic of what the sun, or what how Vesta and Virgo represents. The other thing about having the sun in Capricorn could also mean a sort of like a sense of like being the expert, or the one who knows all, has the knowledge, and could step in and take responsibility, and almost sometimes devoting too much attention to that. But some of this, again, this is just a partial interpretation. Some of this would depend on your moon sign, your Venus, and your ascendant. All of that shows up, but there is that energy there that is practical, that is earthy. Now, I will share the 8th house, though, for you is something that essentially is transformational. That means it's taking Vesta and Virgo, and it's taking it down into the underworld and going through a rebirthing process. So your experience with your Virgo is not going to be as practical as it may end up becoming, or as earthy as it would normally otherwise be. And yeah, if your moon is in Gemini, okay, so yeah, you're going to have a certain resistance to what could call it hard work or being practical. Gemini will want to rebel and be more utilizing more independence and imagination and fun into its sphere. But Vesta and Capricorn, or Vesta and Virgo and Capricorn Sun, gives you an ability to actually connect into the real world. And when you need to do stuff, you can do them, and show up in that way. You may not necessarily enjoy it, but it shows up. So yeah, it's fascinating when you bringing in the if you had all this Aquarius, if you had Gemini, and maybe combined with Pisces with no Virgo and no Capricorn, then yeah, you wouldn't have really much motivation to do much in what we call the real world. But it all depends on the makeup of your astrological, the entirety of your chart there. So that's fascinating, coming from the lineage of, or shamanic astrology coming from the lineage of Gemini. I got a request from sharing the slides of the different archetypes. So for Vesta in Aries, it would be the devotion to the sacred province of for a worthy cause or mission. For Taurus, it'd be to the aesthetics, beauty, and pleasure of the earth, and comforts. For Gemini, it would be for networking, communication, and bizarre but necessary wisdom. And we talked about Leo earlier, but for Cancer, it'd be for nurturing compassion for the new family, tribe, or community. For Virgo, it'd be, of course, for the co-creation and maintaining of the sacred patterning and the rhythm of the planet. Again, this is a general application here. For Libra, to conscious equal partnerships, relationships, both within and without. For Scorpio, the sacred province or devotion to the mastery of life force through walking the edges of creation. Hence the name Edgewalker that Daniel Giamaro and Caitlin Castell talk about. For Sagittarius, it'd be to the meaning of truth through exploring new frontiers. And the last three, sacred devotion or province to Capricorn of ancient wisdom, creating the new operating manual or planting the seeds for the next 7 generations. For Aquarius, the cosmic awareness and that change and revolution are necessary for life evolution. And for Pisces, towards empathy, creating safe space, and merging with spirit. So those are all the different archetypal expressions. And so you have, so Salive is sharing about her 12th house and first house stellium in Capricorn. So that's fascinating. So yeah, your Gemini moon would definitely be something that would resist that as much as possible. They certainly don't necessarily see each other very well in the chart. Yeah, but I see it like from a what. So your ascendant would be Capricorn then. So there is an emergence here of a desire to really reframe or maybe work with Capricorn in an entirely new way. Because, if you had say a Taurus moon, or let's say I don't know, maybe a Scorpio moon, you wouldn't be, I don't think you'd be resisting the Capricorn like would naturally be seen. It would be something that you'd be more readily acceptable of. But in Gemini's case, it's like, something that really is like anathema to it. It doesn't, Capricorn can sometimes repress Gemini, and it's very strong-willed. But once you have certain initiations in your life, it can show up that helps you get in more into your Capricorn self, like cycles. And yeah, I mean, okay. And Pluto, if you've got Pluto there, yeah, that would create fears around going into your Capricorn energy. That it doesn't feel like you might have a fear around doing the work, or that you're going to miss something. If you're not a free spirit, if you're not a free electron in the world. So there's a lot of different interpretations that can be shared about that. So Gail sharing, Sleeves also got a Neptune and Uranus in conjunction on her current ascendant, natally, I'm assuming there.
Yeah, she was those special people. She's 29. She was going through a Saturn return, but
okay,
special people, 90s with all those planets.
Right, right. That's a very special group of people coming through there. So yeah, I truly, now that I know that, you truly are here to revolutionize Capricorn. You're here to make it more, might say, celestial and completely detached from the original, or at least the modern, of what we might say the 20th century or 19th century definition of what Capricorn is supposed to be. So you're here to bring it out into an entirely new form of consciousness. There you go. There you go. So I have Capricorn rising on my chart, and I was born with Uranus squaring my natal ascendant and descendant. So I mean, I can totally resonate with what you're saying here. I don't mind being the practical and sort of a manager, but I'd much rather do a more revolutionary and otherworldly version of Capricorn in my life. And especially with my Vesta in Aquarius conjunct the North Node, it shows up much more strongly that I'm going toward that direction and continue to explore that. So thank you, Saliv. I'm hoping, am I pronouncing her name right?
Yes, that's
Saliv.
right.
Okay. Oh, very good. Very good. Okay.
Anybody else got some other questions? Any other questions?
I just have a comment. I just want to say thank you, Erik, for doing this research. It's a very subtle type of thing. Not a lot of people have devoted a lot of time to it. And I really appreciate you bringing it to our attention, for us to incorporate and think about and integrate and investigate for ourselves. So I really appreciate you being at the forefront of that. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome, Greg. And thank you also. I know you did the research with Chiron, and so I'm actually, maybe with this presentation, what the question you raised about Chiron, I might start looking at that a little more deeper based on what you shared earlier. So yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, that's what I love about what I do and astrology, is that I don't think I ever want to be necessarily an expert and then like, okay, I've learned it all. I want to keep absorbing and bringing it in and learning and more. So there was another, and so yeah, so thank you, Greg. I thought that there was another question in here, but maybe not. I didn't see any question. Okay, so no other question here. Oh, Janet's got a comment. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Janet.
well, you might be familiar with things like Ivy Jacobson or Goldstein Jacobson talks about special degrees. And Gilbert Navarro had shared this at a lecture he did for our group in Connecticut. 11 degrees of Aquarius is the degree of astrology and astrologers, and that's right by your Vesta.
Oh,
Yeah, so you have this devotion to the stars, and you told the story about seeing the stars and how that opened you up. And then at your Saturn return, you kind of went deeper with the spirituality. So I think you have your hearth is in the heavens.
thank you. I love that. I've never put it in those words before, but that gives me a powerful image. Thank you. When I saw those stars, one thing I didn't share when I shared that story was that the message, the transmission I got from looking at that, and I was with a small, maybe 3 or 4 friends that were with me. I didn't share this with them because it might have freaked them out, but I got the word home from the stars, home, and that's what came through. And I've always been interested in space and science fiction, but when I saw the stars, it just the entire dimension of everything else, blew my mind, blew my spirit away, in a good way. And so it gave me something that I didn't realize I was missing at the time.
ET, phone home.
Yeah. Thank you, Janet. And then looks like Saliv is saying, I think she's referring also to your question or your comment about the degree. She goes, I heard 24 degrees Gemini was the astrologer's degree because it's where Uranus was discovered. And then she gives credit to Aquarius affinity to astrology, but why 11 degrees? Starseed. So I don't know, Janet, if you know the answer to this question.
I have no idea. All I know is Gilbert Navarro was a student of Ivy Goldstein Jacobson, who was
Okay.
a Harvard astrologer, and maybe a couple dozen, or I don't know, a dozen and a half degrees in the zodiac that are special in one way or another, whether the degree is sorrow or, widowhood or something that affects the eyes, all sorts of stuff. But what they said was 11 degrees for astrology. I don't know why.
I mean, I certainly, Uranus and Aquarius, I've always found a resonance with astrology, just those two things, just in general. I had an astrologer once share with the group. It was at a tag event, actually, back, I can't remember his name, but he was sharing about, this was during the Uranus-Pluto square, and he was sharing that if you had Uranus, an aspect of Uranus on like your sun or ascendant, then that your involvement of astrology could be more natural for you. It could be something like you can become an astrologer. And so I found that really fascinating when he was sharing that presentation. So yeah, starseeds. I've met others who I would say are starseeds out there in the world, and have had lives in other places. And in shamanic astrology, it is something that is shared that Aquarius moons, and we could maybe even say the South Node as well, but Aquarius and Sagittarius moons are the ones that come from elsewhere, come from from the stars or another dimension. It's not necessarily, I don't think it's necessarily limited to those moons, but as far as like, sort of that archetypal energy and that expression of how they come in can be associated with that. So meaningfully reincarnated to Earth, absolutely. So we all have a role to play, and some come from elsewhere to help humanity out in their, whether it's a smaller role or a bigger role, whatever the case. I think it's important I think it's has value there.
Eric,
Beautiful.
I have a question, if you don't mind. I know you've shared your chart and your information. I just did a little bit of tooling around here. If I understand this correctly, using you as the guinea pig here. If I understand correctly, there was on March 4th of this year, there was a Sun Vesta opposition,
Yes.
which would have started the new overtone, right?
Yes.
Okay, and that would that have been a Pisces overtone, or would that have been a Virgo overtone? Because Vesta was in Virgo, so it probably would have been Virgo.
Virgo,
right?
yes.
Right, okay. That would be your return, because your actually synodic return, if I understand, is no, I'm doing it. It's wrong. It's wrong. I calculated it wrong. When does your Vesta return hit?
So my next one, because I'm turning 50, on the 25th on Thanksgiving, and then I turn 51 next year, and so that'll be part of the next synodic return. So it'll be the next one over, and that would be. That is, do I have that right here? So yes, Vesta would be in Aquarius at that time. So because actually it would just have moved into Aquarius, because I have a Capricorn overtone on my Vesta. And so now it's it's finally precessing into the sign of Aquarius.
Oh, yeah, right. At the anaretic degree. I got you. Okay. What's interesting is your Chiron return ends next March. So these will kind of like almost, not exactly, but they'll be very close to each other. I'd be very interested to see. I thought for a second there, but I calculated it wrong that they overlapped, but they don't, because you do have that, 16 plus month period for that Vesta return. So it's possible. Some people have their Chiron returns in 49, some people have it 51. So
right.
You started in 49 and you end, a few months into 50. Anyway, so I thought there, but I realized I calculated it wrong in my haste.
Oh, that's okay.
But I'd be interested. I really, because a lot of what really interests me is by taking these new developments and making them personal in a way where I can understand and bring more depth to something like a Chiron return. I think that would be great. And, who better to do that than you, because you're, at the forefront of this awareness. So
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Greg. And in fact, I just did a session for somebody maybe a week or two ago, and she was having a sort of a later Chiron return. And so it'll be bleeding into her 51st year. And so there will be some overlap with her, might say secondary Vesta return at that time as well. So yeah, that can definitely happen. And the Saturn square Saturn around that time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there is that energy, but in this case, I'm getting my Chiron return before the Vesta return. But so it's definitely worth exploring further. And so thank you for that. That's it piques the mind. It's like, okay, I want to get into this and start not just crunching numbers, but looking at my own chart, maybe looking at other people's charts and seeing where that comes into play.
Look forward to hearing about it.
Thank you. There'll be more. There'll definitely be more. Anyone else? Any other comments or questions to share?
Anika has a question.
Okay.
Unmute yourself, Anika.
I was trying to. You seem that there's an emphasis on Vesta in the sign that it's in, in terms of the meaning. Is this something that is particular to Vesta or particular to shamanic approaches?
It's more particular to the shamanic approach, but I want to also just make sure that I add in, I've mentioned it a few times, but the house position also plays a big role. So for the purposes of the presentation, I didn't want to necessarily, like in a longer presentation, I might have expanded on this with the house position. Although I did do a little bit of that with the sample charts with Whitney Houston and John Coltrane. So I brought forth a little bit of that as well. But yeah, for example, for my natal Vesta is in the second house with the North Node, since I'm Capricorn rising, and I use a whole sign house system. So this means that there's a certain level of resonance with, receiving the pleasures and the comforts, that, loosely, you could even say loosely on a superficial level, connected to the material world a bit more. But on a deeper level, it's more about the sensuality of the earth and the comforts and pleasures of the Garden of Eden, and just being able to receive it. But since it's Aquarius, it's the pleasures and comforts and the sensuality of the different cosmic knowledge, and the, sort of that, I say revolutionary spirit and idealisms and community and universal love and all that can come with it. And maybe even a little bit into the, innovation and all that kind of thing that can come with it into the second house. So that would show up, as an example for me. But in the same could be held with anyone else if they've got Vesta in the second house or any other house, and it depends on the sign position. And so the house would just give it more a unique signature. And since Vesta spends almost about as much time, or a little bit, no, not quite as much, maybe a little bit longer time than Mars does in a sign, depending on the stage of its synodic pattern with the Earth. The house position can become very important in that expression. But yes, in Shamanic astrology, they tend to emphasize the sign, with the exception of the outer planets and the nodes. They put more emphasis on the house position, except like the outer planets, it could be more like a generational, like a subgenerational experience for the person, where it's not, for example, like Chiron is spending about 7 years in the sign of Aries. So, it's not as individual for a person, because it's spending that long in that particular sign. I hope that answers your question there.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else?
About that 11 Aquarius, Gilbert doesn't use the Sabian symbol, so we're talking about 11 plus, I'm sure. And Sabian symbol there is people on a staircase graduated upward. So we might call it the Stairway to Heaven degree.
That's great, Dale. Thank you. I love that. I sometimes, I don't use the Sabian symbols all the time, but sometimes I dig into them. I kind of go back and forth with what Linda Hill writes, and then what Dane Rudyard writes from the original work coming forth there. So I appreciate the Sabian symbols, because they can give you a greater depth in where, the uniqueness of a person and what those placements represent. So yeah, that's fabulous. And thanks, Dale.
You're welcome. Historically, though, Linda's are actually the originals, because those are from the note cards of Mark Edmund Jones.
Okay, those are okay.
Yeah, and so Jones taught Roger. Roger was so excited he put him right into his book, and so a lot of people think that's the first source because it came out first. But actually the original cards were Linda's, and I think it's always good to look at both, because they have a kind of a different dimension. Mark Jones, he always abbreviates them, even though he had the original cards, and so he likes the shorter version. And Roger, of course, liked the more to elaborate, but I like them all.
Yeah, they're just absolutely beautiful. Yeah, thank you. It's good to know. I've got Linda Hill's book just like ready when I need to grab it. It's just right here, next to me on my bookshelf. So yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments, thoughts?
Happy birthday and happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, happy birthday. Happy birthday, Eric. The big one.
Thank you,
Big
Gail.
50.
Yes. Yes, I was born on Thanksgiving Day, so this is like a, more of my, we could say real birthday coming up here.
It's good to celebrate our solar return in our life. That's a good thing.
It is. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. I'm not dreading my 50th birthday.
That's good. Anyway, thank you for sharing this amazing research, Erik, and really appreciate it. I'm sure it's opened up a few eyes to different ways of looking at not only Vesta, but the idea of synodic returns with all the planets, with the asteroids. I certainly find it very useful with series and series overtones and so forth. So,
Yeah.
Anybody else have another comment or anything, or we'll just?
I was gonna, Gail, just one last thought. I'd like to talk to you maybe in the next week or two about series a little bit, and I have some ideas that maybe we could correspond on.
All right, love to.
Okay,
Love to.
beautiful.
So thank you, everybody. There, people have been putting their thank you and appreciation in the chat. Hope you've been noticing that.
Did you put up your contact information, Erik, or you want to end with that so we can be in touch? Or how will we get these slides or the handout you were talking about?
Oh, I'd be happy to send the slides too. The contact information is on the website, on the tag website. But I could,
yes,
I could bring
on the flyer there on our website, all of Erik's email and web addresses and how to get the book. Yes.
Good thing.
But I can share this one right here if you want. I'm also doing, just for everyone's knowledge, there's another thing that I'm doing with Kaylin Castell about star alchemy and the Bohemian stars. And some of you may be aware of this, but we're currently going through this webinar course, her and I, and we've got a bunch of people that have, they're a part of it, and we're basically talking about the magical alchemy of the stars in our lives and these particular 15 stars, along with the royal stars. So that can also be found at mystaralchemy.com. And when we're looking at, I'm bringing this up because when we're looking at the planets, when we're connecting to the planets in the night sky, the stars themselves also and constellations also contribute something really powerful too. And that's just one of my loves. And of course, being able to work with them more directly is even more powerful. So I encourage everyone to develop their own relationship with the stars and the planets. They're here for us. They're our guides, our teachers, our initiators in life. And sometimes they may not be pleasant, but they're helping us.
Right, they are. Yes, appreciate that reminder. I've had more personal awareness of Arcturus and Spica recently with Mercury conjuncting.
Yes, that was powerful. Oh my gosh. Yeah. There's definitely more to come with that. It's just more knowledge, more wisdom coming from the stars. It's just amazing to experience.
Well, we'll have to have you back to talk more about those Bohemian stars. Maybe you and Kaylin both.
That would be, we would both love that. I'm sorry I wasn't able to do this down there in person when I was in Tucson. I was only there for a few days. But I do plan to get back once or twice more in 2022. So I don't have a full calendar of that yet, but things are so fluid. I do my best to plan, but it's sometimes doesn't always work out that way.
Okay, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
All righty, let's put those visual hands together and thank Erik very much for being part of this doing his presentation. Thank you so much, Erik.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Tucson Astrologers Guild and everyone here. I really appreciate this warm welcome and being here for this presentation. It's to be able to share with a lot of people that have knowledge in astrology. Usually in a lot of cases, I'm talking to people that are like new to astrology. So this has been a lot of fun. All right, bye everyone.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.